This personal story of mine is one that has caused me to question my love of the outdoors, for what I saw out there still haunts me to this day, and sometimes on nights that are dark and still, I can still see that thing with its twisted grin and cackling chuckle. I feel like the only way to escape its memory is to share it, so I'm not the only one burdened by it. To start off, I loved the outdoors all throughout my childhood with a passion. That's why when I had a chance to visit the Rocky Mountains in northern New Mexico with one of my friends, in the summer of my sophomore year of college, I jumped at the opportunity. For some more background information, my friend, who I'll call Jack, had some pretty wealthy parents, so he spent every summer traveling the world, going on backpacking trips, which he, like me, loved to do. He went on trails that I could only dream to hike. Jack knew that I loved to backpack, so he offered to pay for me to come along with him, knowing that there was no way I'd be able to pay for myself. This was absolutely a dream come true for me because I grew up on the East Coast of the United States, and I never went further west than the Mississippi River, and I always wanted to backpack the Rockies. So the school year ended, and I had been preparing to go on the trip. And about a week away from the beginning of the trip, Jack calls me with some bad news, saying that his girlfriend got into a car accident, and that he's gonna have to miss the trip. He did, however, say that he could still pay for me and I could go by myself if I wanted to. My natural instincts told me that it's stupid to go into the woods alone, let alone the Rocky Mountains where I'd never been. However, this opportunity was just too big to pass up, so I told Jack that I would go. I went without Jack and I started off on the trailhead by myself. In the days prior to my arrival, it had continually rained in the upper mountains. So I, being prepared for the weather, fastened my rain gear and headed off along the stream-stricken trail. A few days later, I found myself lonely and wishing actually that Jack was there with me. The trip was supposed to last 2 full weeks, and it had only been 5 days, but I actually wanted to go home, even though it was a dream trip. I only saw 3 people along the trail during those days, and they were going the opposite direction of me. Now, I was thinking about calling it quits at the next stop in a small town that was 40 miles down the trail, because sure, I was seeing some beautiful sights, but really what's the point if I had no one to share them with? I wanted to just get those 40 miles over with, so I continued to walk as the sun went down and began hiding behind the brisk mountaintops. It only took a few minutes for darkness to wash up upon me, and at the end of the day, I was determined to get home, so I continued my journey with a headlamp. I didn't even stop to eat dinner. I just snacked on some beef jerky while I was walking along. I figured I made a stupid mistake trying to get a little further during the night because now I was just totally surrounded by darkness. So I stopped where I was and walked only 5 feet away from the trail to set up my tent. I was supposed to camp a minimum of 50 feet off the main trail, but it was simply so dark, I decided to break that rule just for tonight. I set up my tent and lay down on the bed mat while hiding my face in the sleeping bag. I then slowly drifted off to sleep, listening to the sounds of nature that surrounded me. Later on, the night turned to a cold and crisp one, accompanied by a breeze. I heard a rustling coming from the outside of the tent, and at that time I thought it was nothing. Then I felt the tent shake a little, and heavy breathing with snorts and grunts could be heard. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and shivers ran up and down my spine and my legs. I tried to be as still as I possibly could, so I wouldn't draw any attention to myself. Then I heard nothing like the world stop turning, and out of nowhere the tent was slit with a ripping gash. I tried to get out, but I was in my sleeping bag, and whatever it was now right on top of me. I felt my bones on the brink of being crushed due to the immense weight. It was like one large paw on the top of my back, The claws were slightly drawing blood from my skin where they rested. I stayed as still as a rock, unmoving because I thought my life depended on it, and I was just frozen with fear. Whatever was on top of me finally got off, but never completely left the area. I gathered enough courage that I peeked my head through the top of the sleeping bag and looked at the destroyed remnants of my tent. Then I heard the footsteps. I turned around and beheld a huge grizzly bear that had its face in my bag, looking for food. I remembered that I forgot to tie my bag to the tree to keep the bears and other animals from getting to it. I had just been too tired, and I forgot, and now that simple mistake might even cause my death. I didn't move a muscle or look the bear in the eyes. I just stayed in my sleeping bag and in those remains of the tent for the rest of the night, undetected by the bear. The sun finally dawned over the mountains. I had stayed up all night, terrified, to the point where I was immobile due to shock. With the first traces of daylight, I finally shook out of the trance, and I saw that the bear had moved on. My heart soared, and I felt like a great burden was lifted off my back and my shoulders. But then I remembered my backpack, and my heart sank. I rolled up and examined the damage done closely. My bag was torn, and supplies were just scattered everywhere. I saw all my snacks and food were gone, and only crumbs and ripped wrappers remained. I did, however, rejoice when I saw that my water purifier was not broken, so at least I would have clean water. I thought to myself that I might have survived the bear encounter, but without food or most of my provisions, I'd be lucky if I was able to last 3 days. Now I was in the middle of the woods, in the middle of nowhere, with no tent, no food, and no hope. The trail was so long and rocky that most backpackers avoided it, so getting help from other people was really slim. Plus, even if I did run into other backpackers, they probably couldn't even spare much for me because in backpacking, you only carry the bare minimum, so I really knew I was in trouble. I scavenged what things I could and fastened my backpack together with some twine. I then quickly got back onto the trail, where I looked all around me for campfire smoke or other backpackers, but there was none. I gave up and just continued along the trail with my head hung low. Then there were footsteps coming my way, and my heart soared. I ran to where the sounds were coming from, but to my amazement there was no one there. So I turned around and began to walk off. But then I noticed a slim, pale man standing on the trail only about 10 yards away. I was really surprised how he snuck up on me, but I didn't care now because now I had hope. So I talked excitedly to him while walking toward him, saying, "I was attacked by a bear and I lost all my food and some supplies. I was wondering if I could..." I stopped mid-sentence. My insides seemed to twist with a sickening feeling until I felt something was off about this man. He just stood there looking and not doing anything. Then he answered in a low-toned, scratchy voice. "My cabin is just down this hill next to the river. If you follow me, I'll show you." He gestured down the hill. At this point, I had mixed feelings about following him, but I had no real choice, so I followed. As we went down, the sky dimmed, and soon it was night. We were far off the trail, and I felt my legs getting numb, as if where I was going was ripping at my soul. I didn't have time to think about it, since we were already at the bottom of the hill. The man stopped walking, and his head suddenly snapped 180 degrees, which put him face to face with me, even though his back was facing me just a split second ago. And he stated in a mangled voice, "The sky is night, though it's supposed to be bright, and the fear I can feel draws me near. You can't run, you can't hide, so give up your pride, and I shall blow away your strife by taking your life." As soon as I heard this, I knew I made a mistake by following him, and I broke out in a sprint for the hill. But no matter how I tried to climb it, the rock, and the dirt all turned into brittle sand under my feet. The hill got steeper and steeper, and I couldn't climb it without sliding back down because the sand provided no grip. I heard the man saying again, "And the fear I can feel draws me near." He had a smile on his face that was like none other I'd ever seen. I then darted toward the river, but suddenly it overflowed with muddy water, making it impossible to cross without me drowning. I kept hearing the man speaking that twisted poem, and I kept turning away those dark thoughts. Meanwhile, I was trying to figure out what he was saying by turning that twisted poem around over and over in my head. I backed away from the river and I felt my shoulder bump into something, which caused me to turn around. That's when I saw the man standing right behind me. With my body trembling, I asked, "Who are you? What's going on?" He smiled as he disappeared in a pile of dust that scattered in the cold wind. I looked around wondering where he was, and I knew I couldn't escape because whatever I tried was blocked off, so I gave up and I curled into a ball on the ground. I could hear the man's cackle echoing in my ears like the sound of a gunshot. It was like he was everywhere but nowhere all at once. Then I stood up on my feet and I was struck onto the ground immediately with a hard blow to my chest. I tried to get up again, but the same thing happened. I was hit with so much force, it knocked the wind out of me, and I could feel a burning sensation all over my body. It was hard to breathe. I tried to scream, but no matter how hard I tried, nothing came out, as if the thing had stolen the air from my lungs. I felt my ribs being compressed, and the air being slowly forced out of my body. Then a ring of fire formed around me, and the man appeared in front of me. His eyes were red now, and his neck had markings, like those formed by the fibers of a rope. Then he pulled a rope out of seemingly nowhere, and he fastened it into a knot, right before he tossed it on the ground in front of me. He snapped his fingers, and the rope strung itself up on a tree that was towering over me. He said, "All of this can end. All it takes is one little ride." He gestured at the rope that dangled above my head. I yelled, "I won't kill myself just because of you." The devilish man remarked, "Oh, in that case, these next days will be quite an experience." I thought back to the poem, and I recalled the words, "And the fear I feel draws me near." I figured maybe if I didn't show any fear, the man would lose his power over me. So I began to stand the same way a bear would, protecting her cubs. I cleared my thoughts and I stopped sweating. He saw this and he laughed. "Oh, you thought back to the poem, I see. You're a smart one, so it'll be fun to break you. You'll fall just like the others before you." The man lifted his hands, which were now turning red as the sky darkened, and suddenly I was surrounded by trees full of hanging bodies. They swayed in the wind and were so close to each other they bumped against one another. I didn't flinch a muscle, because I was going to live through this and see my family and friends again. The man began to talk again with a smirk. "You're not scared of this. All these hanging bodies are the ones who came before you. They're mine. And you don't think it's quite an impressive collection, do you?" The devilish man looked up at the bodies. "You know, I didn't kill a single one of them, but they simply pushed themselves to the breaking point. It's the same way you're gonna push yourself." I broke the man's endless taunts. "I won't let you get into my head." The sky then began to lighten, and the man's powers seemed to dwindle a bit. He said, "You're fighting the fear that I impose upon you. You might be strong, but you're not strong enough for this. He screeched, and with a raspy voice he seemed to glide through the air toward me as the wind quickened. His hands stretched out and his skin began to peel away, revealing a black shape of indescribable ugliness underneath. The outer skin flaked off and was picked up by the wind as it turned into flames. The monster screamed and stopped only inches from my face. I held back the feeling of fear that I so desperately wanted to come pouring out. I told him, "I'm not scared of you." I stared firmly into his eyes while saying this, not even half believing my own lie. The beast grew, and then he flew into the rage, but then seemed to calm to where it bowed its head and backed away from me while turning into black ashes, leaving only the sound of a hiss that caused me to shake. Immediately as this happened, I fell into the dirt and I passed out. I awoke in my tent, with sweat covering my whole body. I looked around me and realized the tent wasn't damaged. I had all my food and gear, but a very nasty headache. I thought to myself, it was just a bad dream. That thing you saw, it couldn't actually exist. I then started to pack my things, thinking about the dream since it was almost daybreak. I was already beginning to make and eat breakfast by the time the first rays of the sun peered over the horizon. Soon, I was on the backpacking trail once again. Then I started to pass by a place that looked very familiar, and I realized I had seen it in my dream where I met the man. It was strange. I had never seen this part of the trail before, but I just knew exactly what was there, and it matched everything that was in my dream. I shrugged it off as a mere coincidence and continued to walk, but my eyes wandered down to the place where I had followed him off the trail, and I saw something that chilled me straight down to my very core. In the distance, I saw the exact same man from my dream, dead, hanging from a tree by his neck. Hey friends, have you ever had any unexplained phenomenon happen to you when you were outdoors? How about any unexplained realistic dreams? Leave a comment down below. And as usual, remember to like my video and subscribe to my channel. Also hit the bell icon if you want to stay on top of all my future postings. Until next time, Darke and Dreadly, out.